Alright, good day, hi, and welcome. Okay, so I want to just finish up my series on. That looks pretty cool by the amp. Of the violins and violin pricing and stuff like that. So I think I was about to kind of give you how I was going to price the Lionhead violin and whatever. And I don't know if I gave you the pricing for this, but anyway, what I want to talk about is the how a fiddle factory, fiddle shop, whatever violin store will probably price a violin. And a lot of times, if you're not one of their suppliers and you walk in with a homemade violin and say, "Hey, what's this thing worth?" They'll just say, "I can't tell you." You could ask and ask and ask and ask, and they will just simply say, "I cannot tell you," because whatever, they will not give you an appraisal. But there is places that will appraise your violins and stuff like that. You'll have to hunt around to see what it's worth. But what happens is how they do it, right? And there's a book out there that most violin shops will have, dealers and whatever. And what they will do is have a listing, and the book is pretty much that thick and, about the size of the actual violin here. And what they'll do is they'll basically have a listing of, old violins, what they sold for, and, how they, range. For example, this 1920 Prokop violin, look at that really cool back. I know the lighting's not as good in here, but anyway, this violin here, if you just have one like I do, you just got one, okay? They can range anywhere from, in playable condition, of course, like this one is, anywhere from $750 to about $2,700. Average between $700 and $1,400 is kind of where they mostly have sold for. So it gives you an idea of, that kind of antiquity value, right? That said, there's other things depending on who owned it. Like I say, the hardware on it, you put better strings on there. If you have, a special luthier work on it, all that stuff adds value, right? Kind of stuff. Whereas a no-name violin can be valued, a little bit differently because it doesn't have historical antiquity attached to it. Like, they don't know where it came from, like this violin. They don't know 100% know where it came from, don't know 100% who made it. So they can go by a guideline of, okay, like for example, this has a lot of fine detail in it, the pegs and stuff like that. So that could be worth more. And again, it always comes down to what is one willing to pay for something, right? So yeah, there's a lot of different ways violins are priced. So hopefully through this series, if you've held out this long, the idea of the catchy title of violin pricing is a scam is what it's really getting at is it really comes down to what is it worth to you to buy or sell. So for example, the probably cheapest actual Stradivarius probably sold for something like just slightly under $1 million, like 750,000 or something like that. And the most expensive one was like 16 million or whatever, violins. I think there was a viola that went like for 45 million, and there was another viola that I think holds the record for like 49 million. Now the thing is it's not clear whether it's sold or not. It was auctioned at that was the starting auction price, which is pretty high, right? So there was rumors of a Stradivari selling for more than $15 million or $16 million, but the price wasn't disclosed of what it actually went for. So who knows, right? So the thing is the odds of you finding a Stradivari in a barn is almost next to impossible. You always see it on the news. Oh, did they find a Stradivari? It says Stradivari on the inside. There's so many Stradivari copies out there that say Stradivari in them that a lot of people who don't know don't know, but they find out as soon as they bring it into a shop. Is this a real Stradivari? Usually they get laughed at. It would take a lot to be able to convince somebody that you actually found a Stradivari. Doesn't mean there isn't forgeries out there, doesn't, all that stuff, but we're not going to get into that. But what we can say is that whenever a violin is priced, a used violin is priced, or even a new one is priced, that once you get past that beginner stage, student violin, and intermediate stage, it really gets tricky to find out what to pay for something, because it's not as simple as the more you pay, the more you get. You pay that much more, you get that much more. So it really, what I would say is look at your budget. Okay, and the last point I'll make is, see how much time I got left here. It's always so dark in here, can't see. But anyway, the last point I'll make is that whatever your budget is, look at what qualities do you want in the violin over everything. Playability versus, aesthetics or whatever. Versus the actual tone. I'm one of those guys that don't chase tone too much, because what sounds great on this might not sound great on that, and vice versa. What sounds great on that might not necessarily sound great on this. So sometimes, you think just because you bought the most expensive violin that you could afford, that you've got a violin that'll do everything, and sometimes they just don't. So I would say this: whenever you're buying the violin, like I say, look at your price range, okay, and then just try everything and see what sticks out to you. Maybe one that just has a better fingerboard spacing, one that just has a little bit more brilliant sounding, whatever it might be. And let that be your guide. Like, does it do the job you want it to do? And then the last thing I'll say is that this is probably the biggest indicator that violin pricing is a scam, is that they've done several tests where they took, to prove that is the Stradivari the best violin ever made in human history, right? And some people already argue yes or no. But here's what they did, and it is that this is why I say don't chase tone too much, because it's very subjective. And people's ears are not as reliable as you think they are. Because most people say, yes, I can pick out the Stradivari. So what they did is they took about 4 or 5 violins or whatever that were Stradivari copies, ranging in all kinds of price ranges, and nobody could pick out, in a blindfold test. They were in another room, and all they had to do was pick out the Stradivari. Nobody could pick out the Stradivari. Nobody. In fact, when they polled it, which one was the best sounding violin out of all these violins, nobody picked the Stradivari. It was all newer violins, like almost brand new, right? Which compliments to the maker. So the point I'm making here is you don't get caught up in the hype of something either. There's a lot of great violins out there, probably well under $1,000, even for $300 or $400, that will sound phenomenal. Now, I get it if you're playing for like the like say the NAC orchestra in Ottawa or something like that, or one of these big New York orchestras. Yeah, they might have like, okay, yeah, you can't play with us unless you have a $20,000 violin. I get it. There's stuff like that out there. But for the average person, like I've heard violins in like I say, if you followed this series, for example, I just want to see what time I got left on this before the video ends. But like I was talking about that lady who basically ended up buying a $650 violin over the $3,600 violin, just due to the fact that it sounded better than the $3,600 violin. Again, I would have bought that violin had she not bought it, right? Because it did sound really good, and all that good stuff. Yeah. So, yeah. So hopefully, if you guys are looking for that book or whatever, that you, again, getting a hold of it, it's mainly antique dealers and stuff like that that can get that book. It's not a book that somebody will easily sell to you. If you can find the buyer, like Violin Buyer's Guide book, that's usually how they do it in the shop anyway. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this series, and I'll leave it at about that, because I'm getting pretty cramped here on the floor anyway. So we'll have one last look at my beautiful Lionhead violin here, and my 1920 Procup. And yeah, there we go. So tell me what you guys think.